Honourable Senators, I see a quorum. We are the Standing Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade. We are meeting today to examine such issues as may arise from time to time relating to foreign relations and international trade generally. As part of this mandate, we will have three guests to give us some information about Tibet and the human rights situation in Tibet now. But before we do that, I would ask the senators to introduce themselves. I'll start on my left.
Peter Beam, Ontario. Good morning.
Raymond Saint-Germain, Quebec.
Jane Cordy from Nova Scotia.
Patricia Bovey from Manitoba.
Tony Dane from Ontario.
Mary Coyle from Nova Scotia.
Tanango, Ontario.
Dennis Patterson, Nunavut.
Paul Mascot, Quebec.
Steve Green, Nova Scotia.
And I'm Rainelle Andrichuk from Saskatchewan. So welcome to the committee. We have before us Dr. Sangay, who we will hear his remarks. We have everyone's biography before so that we do not take the precious time that we have here away from really hearing from you and then having a dialogue with you. So, Dr. Sangay, you've been here before in the Senate, so I'm just going to welcome you on behalf of the committee, and the floor is yours to make your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairperson Senator Andrichuk, and the members of the Foreign Affairs and International Trade. It's a great honor and privilege to be here. First, let me take 30 seconds to say a few words in Tibetan. Tarinde Tezo ki ni chisi soju na chaira kogopsh nawadala gadin che shue yin shizeda anzu zenju na pimicho rama lungbal yorde ne phenang ki pimik zadön ta dana shi ngundu dubya chedu man주 돈에 아니 컨두치도 주고요스 안 달래대 저zo 공만나라 아니 저주 표현 돈에 저주 샤야다 아니 표현한 도함이 도담 제시는 거래 안데 고갑 라버델라니 투체나 쉐이 I just express solidarity with Tibetans in Tibet that there is a formal hearing on Tibet because this year marks the 60th anniversary of National Uprising Day in Tibet because in March 1959, thousands of Tibetans rose up in Tibet to claim that Tibet belongs to Tibetans and Tibet should not be occupied. But after that, even as per the Chinese government's official documents, it was established that between the month of March and September of 1959, 87,000 Tibetans were killed. Now, there's another estimation from different sources that approximately 1 million Tibetans have perished under different circumstances since the occupation of Tibet. And this year also marks the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square tragedy, and many brave Chinese advocated for and died and rather killed for democracy in China. And June 4th, just 2 days ago, marks the 30th anniversary. And we all know up to or more than 1 million Muslim Uyghurs are in detention in Xinjiang area as well. So I just want to express my solidarity to them as well. I would like to acknowledge Senator Ta Hai-no for proposing a resolution on Tibet, where the investigation of human rights in Tibet is considered very important. And for the first time, a middle way approach and a proposal for dialogue with the Chinese government is proposed. So this is a formal resolution. Middle way approach is our policy, which is to say that historically Tibet was an independent country. There is no dispute about it. Even Chinese historians acknowledge that, accept that. But what we say is middle way is a viable option. So we are trying to find a middle ground where the Chinese government says sovereignty of China cannot be compromised, territorial integrity cannot be compromised, one China policy cannot be compromised. To that, His Holiness Dalai Lama responded by saying, okay, we could accept all this, provided repression of Tibetans in Tibet end and genuine autonomy is granted to Tibetans in Tibet. So that's the middle ground. So we will not seek separation from China. We will seek autonomy within the framework of the Chinese constitution. That is the proposal. This is a win-win proposal for the Chinese government, for China, and the Tibetan people. So to have a resolution mentioning middle way approach, I think is laudable. I want to acknowledge that. And also, what we seek is preservation of our identity, our religion, our culture, our language is very important. And while we do that, what we want to see is pursuit of our dignity, that's human rights, democracy, and other things. And Canada has been a leader in advocating for democracy and human rights. And so it is very important that Canada shows its leadership on human rights in Tibet as well. So what we would like to see through this hearing from the Canadian government is a consistent and principled stand on human rights and democracy. So with that, I would like to once again thank all the senators who are here and for holding this formal hearing on Tibet. Thank you, because I was told I will have only 5 or 6 minutes, so I think I finished my 5 or 6 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
Raptors won yesterday, so I watched the game too.
All right. I don't know how to respond to that last part. Yay. But thank you for the time frame that you worked within, and you made your main points. And I do have a long list already, so I'm going to start with Senator Massicotte, followed by Senator No.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being with us this morning. It's much appreciated. Could you, I'm sure when you describe how you saw your relationship with China, you must have very specifically thought about what kind of structure. Is that a federation you're seeking? Like, how do you obtain autonomy at the same time respect the one China policy? Is it a bit like Taiwan, or could you describe a bit more how you see that?
There are many examples of autonomy, including in Canada, Quebec, or the First Nations of Nunavut, or South Tyrol in Italy, or Hong Kong, or Taiwan. But I think we can always look at similarities, but there are also vast differences. So I think it's always challenging to have compare with something. But what we seek is actually less than Hong Kong if you go by specifics. If you look at the document called Memorandum of Genuine Autonomy, it has listed 11 points, the things that we want, which are more or less consistent with the provisions of the Chinese Constitution. So hence what we say is genuine autonomy within the framework of the Chinese Constitution. So that's what we seek. Now we can look at Aceh in Indonesia, or Northern Ireland, or Scotland, or there are many examples around the world. But then there are similarities, but also differences. So what we seek is within the framework of the Chinese Constitution. Now, this came about, as I explained. Chinese government insists that sovereignty and territorial integrity of China cannot be compromised. One China cannot be compromised. So hence His Holiness Dalai Lama envisioned middle way approach, and which was unanimously passed by the Tibetan Parliament to say genuine autonomy within the framework of the Chinese Constitution.
And what is it? What is the Chinese government? How have they responded to your principles?
Yes, that's a bit tricky, because what they say is, well, there is hidden agenda for independence. So ultimately, what they suspect is that we want something beyond what we are seeking. So that's what I think the deficit of trust is the problem. So no matter what we say, even if we say within the framework of the Chinese Constitution, so you have a constitution passed in 1984, And these are the provisions listed. And Minority Nationality Act of China says this. And our 11 provisions, there are 5 chapters, all are more or less consistent with the Chinese constitution. And that's what we propose. They say, there is hidden agenda behind it. So it's the trust deficit. So sometimes when I talk to Chinese officials and scholars, often I say, even if His Holiness goes to high mountains and live in cave, and he goes for retreat for 3 years, you'll still suspect that he's doing something. Or if he goes deep down in ocean and keeps away from the world for, it says, 3 years and 3 months, there's a retreat, very famous retreat in Buddhism, you'll still suspect that he's doing something. It's the trust deficit, So again, your point is right. You are willing to give, or acknowledge one China, two interpretation when it comes to Hong Kong. You have already granted autonomy to Hong Kong on the basis of basic law, one country, two system, and Macau. Now, when we Tibetans say, why can't we get autonomy similar to but less than Hong Kong or Taiwan, you say you have hidden agenda. So it's the trust deficit. That's what the Chinese government said.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Senator No.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up. You say the middle way approach is so important in achieving this. Could you elaborate more what concrete steps required to renew the Sino-Tibetan dialogues in order to achieve this?
Now, what we propose is a dialogue between envoys of the Dalai Lama and representative of the Chinese government. And this has taken place before. From 2002 to 2010, envoys of the Dalai Lama met with Chinese counterpart for 9 times formally, and then they have had discussion, but there was no breakthrough. So what we propose is that envoys with Dalai Lama meet with, or rather the Chinese representative meet with envoys with the Dalai Lama. Through this dialogue, they discuss on middle way approach and try to find a solution on the issue of Tibet.
Right now, you have the problem because Chinese does not recognize Dalai Lama appointment of Zhendong Choki Nyama as the official representative for Panchen Lama. What do you think about that? So what difficulty do you have in order to have the dialogue with the Chinese?
Now, there is difficulty, but also, as I said, Canada should have consistent and principled stand on human rights. Chinese government also should have consistent and principled stand on dialogue. With the U.S. trade war, that's what they say is through dialogue, we must solve this issue. Let's have dialogue. So when we Tibetans say, let's have dialogue to solve the issue on human rights, they don't want to have dialogue so far, So they don't show this consistency when it comes to dialogue. You're right. Gendun Choki Nyima, Panchen Lama, was recognized, or rather endorsed by His Holiness Dalai Lama as the genuine reincarnation of the 10th Panchen Lama. But at the age of 5, he disappeared. Now he's 30 years old. We don't know where he lives. So it's been 25 years since he has disappeared. So you're right. The Chinese government has not been consistent. This is a spiritual matter, and His Holiness has right to endorse the Panchen Lama, but then Chinese government has made him disappear, and some say even abducted.
Thank you.
Senator Coyle.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being with us, President Sangay. I'm very sympathetic, and I think we all are as Canadians sympathetic to what you're expressing to us today. I'm curious about 2 things. First of all, you're talking about autonomy for Tibetans within Tibet, within the framework of the Chinese Constitution, the importance of the Tibetan culture, religion, language. And you talk also about dignity, human rights, and democracy. Could you first describe for us how Tibet, in that new, old but new situation of autonomy, would function as a democracy? And then I have one follow-up.
Technically, once you seek genuine autonomy within the framework of the Chinese constitution, the democracy as we know it is limited, constrained, because you have to function within the framework of the Chinese constitution. Having said that, given a choice, we would like to have full-fledged democracy because Tibetan administration, that I am the political head, functions on the basis of democracy. You know, we had our parliament elected since 1960, and my position also is directly elected by Tibetans all over the world in 40 countries, including Tibetans in Canada. So ours is a robust, transparent, very vibrant democracy. So given a choice, that's what we want to prefer, and that's what we already practice, you know. In fact, I would go a little further and say our parliamentary system parliament session is more robust than many of the countries in the world. I will not name Canada because just a few months ago, we had this parliamentary session and I had to face 250 questions for 2.5 days. And I have to give answers, right then and there. So I doubt there will be any parliament where the president of the administration will face parliament and answer questions for 2.5 days. I mean, these finished questions. If they had more questions, I will be answering to them for 3 or 4 or 5 days, no matter how long does it take. So our democracy system is quite robust, and we have a judiciary too, which tries civil cases. And our Auditor General is very powerful, and we have election commission too. So I think with 3 branches of democracy and other independent commission, it's a functioning, vibrant democracy.
How would you reconcile that functioning, vibrant democracy that you have described with the obvious ambition to re-embed and also create an autonomous situation for those Tibetans in Tibet, but also the Tibetans outside of Tibet? How would you reconcile that in that framework that we're discussing?
Yes, that's why I said, given a choice, we prefer the exiled Tibetan democracy system. But our priority is, and rightfully so, should be 6 million Tibetans in Tibet. And for 6 million Tibetans in Tibet, our priority is to alleviate their sufferings and human rights violation and give them a situation or circumstances better than what they have now. So our preference is, genuine autonomy, where they can have their own administration, they can practice their own language, their own culture, their own religion, so that's where they can preserve their identity. And that's under threat. And that's the number one priority. So, exiled Tibetans are 150,000, so we are just, 5% of the population, or 2.5%. So for our priority is, 90+% of Tibetans in Tibet. That's why we are functioning on genuine autonomy within the framework of the Chinese Constitution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Saint-Germain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merci beaucoup d'être ici.
Thank you very much for being here. You have helped us to better understand the situation. On that point, my question will have to do with the issue of countering misinformation and false information that is distributed about Tibet in a number of countries, including Canada. Over the past few months, some groups
So I'll try to, I'm a Francophone, but I'll try to draft my question in English. Okay? So my question is with regard to the disinformation about Tibet. This disinformation at least for the last few months, came from a few groups pro-Beijing who made the headlines for having tried to intimidate Chinese citizens, especially Tibetans, in the Canadian territory. Last April, the pro-Peking group Tibetan Association of Canada was suspected for having circulated false letters pretending that these letters were coming from the Prime Minister as well as the Immigration Minister, And this organization is notably suspected of following instructions directly from the Chinese authorities. So do you believe that first we can fear an increase of this type of actions, of disinformation in Canada? And do you have any suggestions for us in order to counter these disinformation attempts?
Thank you very much. That's a very important question. The registration of Tibetan Association of Canada and with the fake endorsement from the PMO's office is a serious matter, mainly because we have Tibetans in Ontario and Ottawa and Tibetans all over Canada, and they are the genuine representative of the Tibetan people. This Tibetan Association, so-called Tibetan Association Canada, does not represent 99% of Tibetans in Canada. So it's misleading, and what they did is fraudulent. So I think we should be very vigilant about it, because they have attempted to do so in US, and they have tried so in Australia too. And these people represents a fringe fundamentalist kind of a group, which are, we believe, used by the Chinese government for their own political purpose. Hence, we should be very careful and vigilant. And for the fraud that they have committed, and whatever legal recourse needs to be taken, should be taken. Because I think this is just the beginning. Registration is one thing, and then activities will follow. And we should be very, very careful about them.
Sub-question, Madam Chair. Would you be aware of other such associations which are active in Canada?
I think this is informally, I'm sure there are some. This is the first attempt to have a formal registration. And they did so also in the US. And they don't represent 99% of Tibetans. That we can be absolutely certain. Because we have few Tibetans in Ottawa, and Tibetan Association members are here. They get together, they elect their executives, even in Toronto, in Calgary, in Vancouver. So we elect, the representatives through democratic process, and they just come and register and claim to represent Tibetans in Canada, which they absolutely do not represent.
Thank you.
Senator Bovey, I have now a long list again. Senator Bovey, Senator Atulajan, Senator Patterson, Senator Beam. And we're fast running out of time, but so I'm sure we can fit you all in.
I want to thank you, sir, for being with us today. And as one who has followed this recent history very closely, having invited and received the Dalai Lama in British Columbia, about 20 years ago or more, I know that you're seeking, as you say, that middle ground regarding culture and language. I wonder if you can talk more, please, about religion and where that is in your discussions now or your concerns now. And as I said, I have had the privilege to work with many of the Dalai Lama's monks, both from India and those in Canada, over many years.
We are very proud that His Holiness Dalai Lama was received by Canada on various occasions, and he still is the honorary citizen of Canada. So we are very proud of that. And thank you very much for receiving him and in helping Tibetan monks. As far as religion is concerned, it's vital. Tibetan civilization is based on Buddhist principles and Buddhist values. Hence, the Communist Party of China knew that when they invaded Tibet, the first thing they did was destroy 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries. 99.9% of monks and nuns were disrobed. Religion as we knew it just physically disappeared from the world. But the good news is, after 60 years, Buddhism is back in Tibet in social and private space. What is happening in Tibet is Tibetans are doing on their own. As far as Chinese government is concerned, they want to systematically destroy, dilute Tibetan Buddhism, make Tibet into a Chinatown, Tibetan into Chinese. So there is, lots of restrictions on religious practices in Tibet. But Buddhism is back. The assertion of Tibetan identity is back in social and private space. What it shows is that on the spiritual front, after 60 years, we have prevailed, or rather we are prevailing from 98% of destruction with only 2% chances of success. We took that as a Buddhist with, resilience on our side and rugged spirit of mountain people. We fought and we have preserved Tibetan Buddhism, so we are very proud. But the policy remains, and consistently you hear and you read about Serta and Larungar Monastery in Serta being destroyed. From 20,000 monks and nuns, it's being demolished, reduced to half. And Yashingar, with 5,000 nuns, is being demolished as we speak. So all these are taking place despite all the challenges. Preservation of Buddhism is very important for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Atulajan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here this morning. My question too was about religion, and with Senator Bovia. So I would just like to take it a bit further and say that when we look at Tibet, when we look at the Uyghurs who are in internment camps, there were stories coming out of the last month was Ramadan, where they were forced to eat, they couldn't fast. So religion seems to play a big part in where China refuses to have a dialogue, or keeping the Uyghurs in camps and saying they're reprogramming them. But you have prevailed. The Tibetans have prevailed. From someone who is from that part of the world, from the subcontinent, we grew up listening to the stories. We heard about the monasteries, the wealth of information, the libraries that you have. So tell me, what is life like for an ordinary Tibetan right now? All that information, has anything been saved? It's a very closed-off area, very difficult to get to. Yet you continue to flourish. You continue to have a voice. And also, are the younger people using social media to get their message out?
Social media is very much restricted in Tibet as well. They use what we call Chinese firewall to prevent any information from going inside Tibet. What they have is a policy called 1 and 100, meaning they will, export 100% of the information or propaganda to the outside world, but they will not let even 1% of information from outside world come inside Tibet. So that's their policy. So it's very, very difficult. And you're right, as you are from a very prominent family in Pakistan. So, Uyghurs are under very difficult situation. They are not allowed to celebrate Ramadan. They are not allowed to name their children after, holy saints of Muslim faith. And even in Tibetan monasteries, if the monastery runs a school to teach Tibetan language, the monasteries are given notice to shut down those schools and throw away all those Tibetan children below the age of 18 and send them to Communist Party schools. So even the private efforts are being restricted. So on the one hand, I did say that, from 2% chances we have succeeded, but it's in context, I'm saying. What they destroyed is physically they destroyed everything. And in Tibetan monasteries, we have, statues made out of gold and silver and different kinds of stones. 75% were burned, melted, and have disappeared. What we recovered is only 25%. So again, I just want to put that in context. When you say we have succeeded, I'm not saying we have succeeded 100%. So a lot of challenges, even now, it's going on. For example, the best example is the Chokhang Temple. It's the holiest shrine in the Tibetan Buddhist world. It's like Mecca or Vatican for us. If you go to Chokhang Temple in Lhasa today, there are sharpshooters on rooftop. So there are cameras watching over you. So some Tibetans have said, so there are more, cameras following you than the butter lamp that we offer in the temple. So there are more guns pointing at you than the monks who are inside the temple. That's a way of saying. So in fact, also, for example, those Tibetans and monks who want to come to India to seek teachings from His Holiness Dalai Lama, their passports are not only denied, now they are taken back, even those who got passports. So there was one Tibetan blogger who said, Tibetans have better chances of going to heaven than going to India to seek teachings from His Holiness Dalai Lama, because not even 1% of Tibetans are given passport. So these are the restrictions imposed on to have religious practices of Tibetans.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to our final member of the committee, Senator Beam, and then followed by Senator Patterson to conclude.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Dr. Sangay, for being with us today. Your comments are, of course, very compelling. I'm wondering if over the past few years, your international advocacy has suffered in any way. And I say that because we have seen at the same time a greater assertiveness by China on the international stage, whether it has been, as has become traditional, repercussions for the diplomatic reception of the Dalai Lama in various countries, or indeed on other matters where sometimes trade actions are seen as a reprisal for engaging too much in the Tibetan question, if I can put it that way. So I'm curious as to whether you are finding that the doors are still open when you travel. Obviously, the doors are open here in Canada, but in Europe and indeed at the Human Rights Council in Geneva.
I just want to thank Senator for asking the question. Yeah, it's not that common to have a formal hearing on Tibet like we are having it. So it's very courageous and honorable on the part of the committee, and especially the members who are present here, just to show up for the hearing means a lot, because you're sending a clear message to Beijing, and especially to Tibetans who are suffering in Tibet, that you care for human rights, you care for their environmental issues as well. Now, although Freedom House has come out with a report for the last 3 years, in all 3 years they have listed Tibet as the least free region after Syria. Now, we all know about Syria, but the second least free region in the whole world is Tibet. And we want to share that to the rest of the world, but the Chinese government presence is everywhere, and they're very, very strong. I was in Lithuania for 36 hours, and the Chinese embassy issued a press release condemning my visit. I was in South Africa last year, and they issued a press release, and they said 100 people to protest against my visit to a talk that I was giving at the law school. They stormed the auditorium, they stormed the stage, and chased away all the students. And last November, I was speaking at University of Toronto. I think 50 or 60 Chinese students just showed up with the Chinese national flag, singing Chinese national anthem. In fact, I called some of them inside so that we could have dialogue after the talk. So there, I think the tentacles of the Chinese government is everywhere. And what is most disturbing is the elite co-optation. When you see ministers after ministers, I don't want to say bought, but rather change their service from being a minister of a country to a consultant of the Chinese company or government, that's very disappointing. I have had the privilege of going to Australia. One time the talk was whether the foreign minister of Australia would meet with me or not. Next time when I reached, he was the consultant for the Chinese government. The trade minister of Australia was paid, I think, $800,000+ a year, and he's a consultant from a Chinese company. And even a foreign minister of a European country I would not name has become a president of a major international, okay, I'll name the Davos World Economic Forum, supported by the Chinese government. Is a former foreign minister of Norway. When you see that, it's very disturbing. What the Chinese government is trying to do is restructure United Nations, redefine human rights, so that the political rights and civil rights as we know it, which is inalienable, which is fundamental, which is universal, it's made secondary to what they call quote unquote development. So if as long as government provides bread, butter, and shelter, citizens should keep quiet, and then you will have no democracy, no freedom of speech, and that's what socialism with Chinese characteristic mean. So I think the whole world, the world order, it's under threat, under stress, because they're redefining everything, and it's no more simply a Tibet issue. Tibet is the litmus test. If you are for democracy and human rights, you have to be for Tibet. Then if you don't speak out for Tibet, then you are not for human rights and democracy. That's why I applaud the consistency and principled stand of Canadian government and Canadian leaders. That needs to continue. Hence, you're right, from country to country, they are coming under enormous stress from the Chinese government. Having said that, many countries are again pushing back. For example, Czech Republic has the largest Tibet parliamentary support group in whole of Europe. We have 51 members of parliament signed up. And Japan has the largest group in the whole world. 91 members of the parliament and 60 or 70% from the ruling party are part of the Tibet parliamentary support group. And we also have in Canada Tibet parliamentary support group, and some of the members are here in this, or they're doing a very good job. And one of the unique projects they have is to hire Tibetans as interns. Some of them are sitting at the back here. They come do summer interns, and they learn about Canadian parliamentary or the government process, and they share their Tibetan experience, and they go back and become leaders in the Tibetan community. This unique project is being now replicated in other parts of the world. So on that front, I think the Canadian Parliament Support Group, and we have Honorable Member James, who is here, they have done a very good job. So I hope you all will join them as well and make it bigger, perhaps the biggest in the world. So that needs to cross 92 members of parliament. I hope it happens. Jointly with senators and the members of parliament, it will happen.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to our final senator to ask the final question, Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we're honored to have you